Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Division 7, Gary Van Dam.
Here.
Division 6, Audrey Miller.
Here.
Division 5, Robert Paris.
Here.
Division 4, George Lane.
Here.
Division 1, Shelley Sourceable.
Here.
Division 3, Frank Donato.
Here.
Division 2, Keith Dias.
Here.
Wayne Chisholm.
Here.
Tilden Kim.
Here.
And Holly Hughes present.
Thank you. Item 3, voluntary public roll call. If any member of the public wishes to introduce themselves, please feel free to do so now.
Hi,
John Eucasted, AV Mutual Group.
Hi, John.
Hi, Keith.
Hi, Keith, and members of the board. This is John Joyce reporting for Antelope News. Want me to talk again?
Courtsville Water District, Brent Byrne.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, we'll move along to item 4, public comments and period open to the public. If anyone wishes to address the board on any item not on the agenda, please feel free to do so now. If there are no public comments, we'll move along to item 5. Do I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
Mr. President, this is Rob. I move we adopt the agenda.
Thank you.
This is Director Miller. I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam.
Yes.
Audrey Miller.
Yes.
Robert Paris.
Yes.
George Lane.
Yes.
Shelley Sourceable.
Yes.
Frank Donato.
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. Item 6, new business. 6A1, notice of intent to adopt an amended conflict of interest code at a public hearing to be set October 11, 2022 for the Avek Water Agency. Who will present this item?
This is Dwayne. I'll take this item. Board President Dias, members of the board, this is a procedural item to provide the public with a notice of intent that we intend to amend our conflict of interest code. We are required to provide a 45-day comment period to begin on August 10th, and before we authorize that action. And as noted by Board President Dias, we'll have a public hearing to consider the changes in the conflict of interest code. The only change we're anticipating is the addition of a new job title, our new engineer that we hired about 4 or 5 months ago, putting him within the conflict of interest code, so he has to file his forms like everybody else. So in essence, that's what this particular item is. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Director Donato, I have a question. So explain to me, I mean, the conflict is a see, I mean, I guess there's different definitions of conflict. So an employee, because of the job title, is a potential conflict of other employees. Conflict for what? I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah, a good example would be, for example, if let's take this position, an engineering position, and this would require the notification by this person of any inducements that someone might have received from a particular supplier or vendor, pipe supplier, materials vendor, other types of things. If, for example, if the pipe supplier, I'm going to give you an exaggerated example. Say, for instance, they provided a weekend trip to Cabo or something like that. They would be required to report that, and it may have may provide a conflict in how they go about making pertinent decisions. So this is to protect the public, to make sure that that each employee is living up to the conflict of interest code that's as part of the Political Reform Act of 1974.
Well, then, leads to my next question. I mean, we already have it for the other. So every time we hire an employee, we have to have a conflict of interest.
All it requires, Director Donato, what we're trying to do is unless they're identified in the code that we have for the agency, they're not required to fill out the Form 700, I believe it is. With this inclusion, each of those employees that has the potential for some conflict has to fill out the Form 700.
Okay.
And so that's why we're modifying it to make sure everyone's complying with the law.
Okay, thank you.
This is Director Sourcewell. Has this gone through committee, or is it going to be given to a committee?
It's it hasn't gone through a committee. In the past, this is a legislative requirement to be compliant with the code. And like you say, the only change in the code, if we had any substantial changes in the code, other than a title addition, we would have brought it to an agency or a committee. But this is just to add a new employee's title to make sure that they're compliant with the code and providing the Form 700.
But Director Sourcewell asked a good question. I believe that this should have been brought up in a personnel matter to make them aware, because we are the governing board of directors, to make sure this or anything like this goes through. Just because the state mandates it, but they mandate a lot of things, and they still go through the different committees. I just think in the future.
This is just to clarify. If the board would wish this to go to committee, we certainly have time. This is just a notice of intent that we're going to have a public hearing to discuss the matter. We have a good 60 days to send this particular item to a committee before any adoption is done in October.
I think it's a good idea. I think it should go to the committee. That's my opinion.
And I also think that we need to assess whether or not there's anything else that needs to be adopted in this conflict of interest code. Get it all done at once. If there's any other thoughts, or any of the other managers have something they can have input also.
Is this only managers, Dwayne?
Yes.
No, I mean, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's only certain designated employees.
Yeah, Director Lane, we followed this procedure for a number of years. Yeah, it's basically housekeeping. We're adding one more person, and so I guess it never hurts to go through a committee, but it's got to be done by state mandate.
Yes, and as Dwayne mentioned, we have several weeks to be able to send it to committee. But in the meantime, can I ask that we at least set the hearing date tonight by approval of Board Order 6K1?
I move we do. I move that we...
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam.
Yes.
Audrey Miller.
Yes.
Robert Paris.
Yes.
George Lane.
Yes.
Shelley Sourcewell.
Yes.
Frank Donato.
Yes.
Keith Dice.
Yes, the measure passes. Thank you very much. And now we will move along to a special item, very similar to the last one. Notice of intent to adopt an amended conflict of interest code at a public hearing October 11th, 2022 for the Avek Water Agency Financing Authority. But to do that, may I have a motion to adjourn to the Avek Water Agency Financing Authority meeting?
Mr. President, this is Rob. I so move.
Thank you.
This is Director Miller. I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam,
Yes.
Audrey Miller,
Yes.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. Now we are in a meeting of the Avek Water Agency Financing Authority, and we will consider special item SBO-FA. Dwayne, again, would you like to introduce this item?
Sure. Very similar to the previous item. This is a notice that it's providing that we have a similar public hearing on October 11th, 2022, 5:30 p.m. And once again, it's just to amend the conflict of interest code. This will also be addressed by the committee as before that meeting occurs. Not much more to add.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or discussion? If not, could I have a motion to approve?
Mr. President, this is Rob. I move we approve.
Thank you.
I'll second
And again, thank you very much. Again, all we are doing is establishing a date for the public hearing. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam,
Yes.
Audrey Miller,
Yes.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. Thank you. Item 7, consent calendar. May I have a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar?
Okay, we need to reconvene to the AVEC meeting.
Oh, thank you very much, Holly. Do I have a motion to reconvene to the Avek Water Agency?
Director Lane also moved, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Director Miller, second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam,
Yes.
Audrey Miller,
Yes.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
The measure passes. Thank you. Item 7, consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar?
This is Director Sorsable. I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Director Donato, I'll second it.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam,
Yes.
Audrey Miller,
Yes.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. Thank you. Item 8A1, consideration and possible action on accepting and filing the check register lists from July 15th, 2022 through July 28th, 2022. Dwayne?
Yes. Thank you, Board President Dias, members of the board. In your packet, you have a list of the items. We have that, Holly? Thank you. You can see at the top of the checklist, we have our two largest checks that we have as far as our expenses to the Department of Water Resources for our contract with the state of California. Following that, we have our monthly expenses as outlined in the list here, and we did have some. The board did have some comments with regards to item 4 and item 16, which staff addressed. Moving on to the second page, we finish up our monthly items, and then we go to the board approved items. There was some discussion on item 22 at the Finance Committee meeting, and staff addressed their questions. In addition to that item was also item 34, 35, 36, and 37, which were discussed at the Finance Committee meeting. Following the board approved items, we have the GM approved items here. And once again, there was some discussion about item 43, 44, and 45, which were answered by staff. And that completes the GM approved items on page 3. And then we move on to page 4 for operation and maintenance. And you can see there that we have quite a few items. These are all below $25,000. On the following pages, we have the separate accounting, High Desert Enterprising Fund account and the expenses that are associated with that account. If there's any questions that any of the board members have, staff is here to try and answer those questions best to our ability.
Mr. President, Director Lane, it looks good, and we appreciate taking an extra couple of minutes so the entire board is up to date a little bit more. One thing we used to do a number of years ago, and there wasn't maybe any particular reason, that we would take one bill, especially when we started a lot of construction projects, and we would look at it in detail about the hours and the rate. I guess we've already agreed to the rate, but sometimes there were items of a question. They were sent back, and we received a corrected bill, and we'd talk to staff. So I would think maybe in the future that might be beneficial to the agency and to the taxpayers, and just something about maybe not for a while, but at some point in time, we would choose a bill and look at it in detail. We choose a bill randomly and look at it in detail. But that's something we did for years.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sourceable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. Thank you. Item 8B, High Desert Water Bank Committee. Director Donato, do you have a report?
Yes. Committee met the other day, and we're going to have a monthly update on the High Desert Water Bank project. And is it KJ going to be doing this, Dwayne or Matt?
Yeah. Good evening, Director Donato. This is Matt. So as you mentioned, we presented this information to the High Desert Water Bank Committee, and they recommended presenting the same information to the full board this evening. And we have a couple folks on our program management, construction management, and design team that are going to present this evening. First item we'll give an update on is the construction activity associated with the High Desert Water Bank. And Tien Ng, who is the construction manager with Kennedy Jenks, will go through a few slides. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Tien.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, good evening, directors, Dwayne, and my fellow co-workers, Avek. This evening, we have 3 construction projects to update. Let's start with the aqueduct turn-in projects by Blois Constructions. The projects got the DWR encroachment permit approval on July 8th. And subsequent to that, we have a pre-construction meeting. And since then, we have daily presence of DWR inspectors for the project. And the contractor has actually excavated those cofferdam anchors, and they have poured the concrete for the cofferdam. And currently, we're scheduled to set the cofferdam. The date hasn't been set because it has to be approved by DWR, but with the setting is at between August 23rd to 26th. I just wanted to note that this date has been a change from our July committee meeting. This is because the time for the underwater inspection by divers has been pushed back by DWR, and that inspection is going to happen tomorrow at 6 a.m. Matt, next slide, please. Here we have a few photos that we took for the month of July. On your left here, you see a complete cofferdam that was put together, and that's the front side. That's the side that's going to the water facing the canal water. The pictures in the middle is the back side. That's the one that once the cofferdam is set, it's going to be pumped dry. That's the workers can start cutting the lining and set up the aqueduct structures. And the photos on your right, the very right bottom, is the excavation of the cofferdam anchors. And I want to give you some information about the cofferdams. And the front side, it's about 48 feet long and 18 feet high. The back side, which is the wing panels, they're 51 feet each. So when you put them all together, the weight is 83,000 pounds. Plus, as it's going in, there are 50 concrete blocks go along with it that weigh about 61,000 pounds. So the total weight of those cofferdam is 144,000 pounds. I believe that during our committee meeting, our committee chair, Donato, calculated out it was about 72 tons. So next slide, please. The second project, the well drilling package 2 by Bakersfield Well and Pump Company, completed recovery well R3 and also completed the well pump test. And when I read the pumping test report and the testing, they were able to pump in excess of 2,000 gallons per minute from one of the reporting. And if Tim, if you are online here, would you mind take a minute to share what the full report means to the board, please?
Sure, happy to do that, Tim. Yes, we're in the process, as you see here, of constructing the next 6 wells, and we've got 3 done. And early results from the pumping that we've done in the first well were very favorable. As Tim said, we were pumping over 2,000 gallons a minute in that well. And, our basic design goal for these wells was 1,800 gallons a minute. So this one exceeds the goal we were trying to achieve. So that's a good outcome because that is the kind of capacity we're going to need to meet the recovery goal of the project in the future.
Thank you, Tim. So the contractor also finished drilling a recovery well R2, and they're currently setting up the pumping test. And tomorrow we have our regular weekly meeting. We will get more information when they're going to be setting up and ready to do the test. Since then, the contractor has moving on, started drilling recovery well R9, and they also have rig number 2 show up late July, and they have started drilling recovery well R13. Next slide, please. So we still have 2 recovery wells, R11 and R18. That's next in line after they finish R9 and R13. Next slide, please. Here's some photos. The photos on your left bottom, if you were to drive by the site in the evening at night, this is what a night operation drilling looks like. The photo in the middle is for recovery well R2, and that's all the sand filter pack lined up, during the drilling process. And the photo on the right bottom here is for recovery well R3, where the contractor set up a temporary pump with discharge piping. And shown here are those temporary berm they also built up during the pump test. Next slide, please. The last project is the stage 1 and stage 2 recharge system improvement projects. As you can see, this project was just awarded in June. And since then, we have a pre-construction meeting. The contractor mobilized Monday. And the project has an early milestone we set on May 1st of next year, 2023. And the requirement is that they need to complete at a minimum of 200 acres of recharge basins so that Avek can use it to start recharge. And the project completion will be on July 26, 2024. Unfortunately, we don't have photos yet, but for the next month's update, we will have photo to share with the board members. Matt, that's conclude for this month's constructions update.
All right, thank you, Tian. Good report. Any questions from the directors before we move on to the next presentation? All right, hearing none, we're going to switch gears. This presentation is pretty long. We have Tim Leo with Montgomery and Associates, who is a subcontractor or subconsultant to Stantec, who is the project design lead. We also have Joe Long with Stantec at the Avek office this evening. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Tim Leo, who's going to walk through a presentation on the updated groundwater modeling results that his firm and team have put together. Take it away, Tim.
Great. Thank you, Matt, and good evening, directors and other attendees tonight. As Matt indicated, we are going to work through about 25 some odd slides tonight to talk through the modeling program that we conducted for the High Desert Water Bank. And I want to look back for a moment to where we started. So we started this work in 2016, in fact, with a very, very preliminary model we built to help with the conceptual design and thought process on the High Desert Water Bank with Westwater Research. And that initial modeling helped size the project. As we know today, the goals of the project, 70,000 acre feet of recharge and recovery capacity per year for each of those, and then a total storage of 280,000 acre feet. So we started on this work way back in 2016. Then in 2019, we were retained as part of the Stantec team, and we built another model of the site. Both of those models were started with the USGS model of the entire Antelope Valley. And that model was used to do some preliminary sizing of the project as we were beginning the engineering design parts of the project. And then we went to the field in 2021 to acquire a bunch of data for the project. Those data were highly valuable in advancing our understanding of the site conditions, which are critical for designing the project. And then those data that we acquired in that program were used to update the model. The model I'm going to talk about tonight is a computer model. It's a mathematical model that we build using computer code, and we take information from the site on the geology and the hydrogeology, and we put it in the computer. So we build up this tool. These tools are very, very useful at designing projects like the High Desert Water Bank, where we need to be able to predict into the future what might happen when we operate the project. So that's kind of the concept we're talking about tonight. As we work through some of the details. So I'm going to go through some background details about the initial model. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the field program. And then I'll talk mostly about the updated model. This updated model we have more confidence in because we have much more data from the field. That's what we're going to focus on tonight. Before I get going, if you have any questions, please do stop me during the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions during the presentation. That's better. I'll do my best to answer the questions, and if I can't answer them tonight, I'll make sure that I get an answer pulled together and work through staff to get you the answer. So always happy to interact and take questions. Next slide, Matt. Great. The initial model that we built back in 2020, as I indicated, we started with the United States Geological Survey model of the entire Antelope Valley. That model's been around for, let's say, 10 years. Actually, there was an old model, the version of that that's been around for 20 years now. And we started with that model. That model's been used for lots of studies in the valley for years. And so we use that same model. And you can see on the graphics on this slide that we carved out the western portion of that large groundwater model, and we refined it and made it purposely built to study the High Desert Water Bank project. And we migrated the model to a newer, more modern code within the ModFlow platform. The ModFlow platform of models is a USGS built platform, been around since the 80s, many variants of that model. It's the most widely used modeling code in the world. And so we're using that code and a very modern version of that code. As you can see on the graphics here on this slide, we've refined the model. We made the model very specific and finely built in the area of the High Desert Water Bank. We added a bunch of layers to the model, as the colored graphic shows. So the model has been designed to specifically study the operation of the High Desert Water Bank. And then we fed data into the model that we had from the site to make the model more specific to site conditions. And then we went through a process of calibrating the model. I'm going to talk a little more about the calibration of the model in a few slides, but you can view calibration of the groundwater model similarly to if you have a well pump and you put a flow meter on that well. That flow meter needs to be calibrated every once in a while to make sure that it accurately reports the flow coming out of that well. That's basically the same process we use to calibrate a numerical mathematical model of the groundwater system. We want to see if we can reproduce what we observe at the site to make sure that our model, is a good model, if you will, to use for predictive purposes. And once we get the model built and we're happy with the model, we use it to estimate various things. In this case, we're focusing on recharge and recovery capacity of the project. And we're going to talk about a few of the things that we did with the model, the updated model, as we work through the presentation. So that's a summary of how we got from where we were a few years ago to where we are now. And now we're going to turn our attention to the more recent stuff that we've worked on. And the next slide, please. So as I indicated, we spent 20, let's see, we got the yellow squares have been moved a little bit here, but so we spent 2021 in the field, and that was a very, very critical step for this project. We needed to get some additional data from the subsurface for the project, but more importantly, we built the first 4 pilot recovery wells. So the wells you can see on the slide here, they're near or in the yellow boxes. So you can see the PRW1s on the west there, PRW4 on the north, PRW2 in the center south part of the site there, and you have PRW3, the farthest east well. So those 4 wells were built and tested. We did a lot of work to test those wells in various ways. We pumped the wells to see what happened when we pumped them, how much water we could get from them, what conditions did they cause in the aquifer system. We also did a bunch of testing while we drilled them and more testing after we completed the wells to get information about what's happening when we pump the water out of the well, where is it coming from, what's the water quality in that water, how does that water quality vary with depth. So we did a significant amount of testing, and all this effort was really designed so that we could improve the confidence of our predictive modeling tool to help Joe and his team design the project, sizing the recharge basins, how many wells we're going to need to recover the water, those types of things. We also installed some monitoring equipment, which we're not going to talk about tonight. And really the focus of the field program was to really look and get depth-specific data. We knew a little bit about the conditions of the site when we started the project, but we didn't know much about how things change with depth. And that was critically important because as we drilled the wells out here to design those wells, we needed to know what's happening with depth so we can figure out how deep to make the wells, how to screen the wells. So really the focus here was getting data for the model, but also data to design the wells. So that's a summary of what we did in the field, and all these data then were fed into the groundwater. Next slide, please. So the key findings from the field program. So as we expected, the water table is relatively deep here, about 280 feet, although not as deep as you might find, say, in the Palmdale area, where its water levels are greater than 500 feet in some areas there. So 280 feet to water at the site, roughly. It varies over the footprint of the site. The aquifer conditions of the site, as we expected, vary with depth. They almost always do. And the site, in relative sense, is a relatively moderately conductive, meaning that the water moves through the subsurface strata with with moderate ease, if you will. Permeabilities range to, I list some numbers there, to 1 to 15 feet per day. That would be lower than you might find near Palmdale, for example. But nonetheless productive enough to pump a lot of groundwater. And we see productive conditions in the aquifer system down to 1,000 feet, or even below 1,000 feet, in fact. So the wells we've drilled, as we know, as we'll see in a minute here, are roughly 1,000 feet deep, a little bit more in some cases, a little bit less in others. And we see production at depth, so that's good because we need that capacity to meet the recovery goals. We also knew that water quality could be an issue here. It is in many groundwater basins, and so we did quite a bit of water quality sampling. And the basic thing we found was that arsenic was the only constituent we found that exceeded the federal MCLs for drinking water standards in one case. So that's why we call it the primary constituent of concern. You can see in the first bullet there that the blended concentration out of each of the wells when we pump the wells range from 11 to 19 micrograms per liter. The MCL, but for arsenic, is 10 micrograms per liter. So we exceed the MCL. We also exceed what we're not going to talk in detail about tonight. More information will come in the future on this. The Department of Water Resources sets standards for non-project water that's pumped into the aqueduct. We also exceed the arsenic standard for DWR's non-project pumping standard. So that's an indicator of how our water quality compares to what's in the aqueduct. And then generally concentrations increase with depth, although not terribly rapidly with depth, so that's a good thing. But overall, we do tend to see higher concentrations with depth. So that's a high-level summary of what we found in the field. Lots of other details that we looked at that we won't talk about tonight, but overall, a very, very effective field program that really informed this project in meaningful ways. Next slide, please. The slide didn't change here, so let's see here. I don't know what's up here tomorrow. So I think we missed a table in here. So there was a table in the presentation that summarized how we built the wells. That table has been shown before, but in general, the wells are, like I said, about 1,000 feet deep. And since we don't have that table here, we move on to let's see, where are we at? Confused. Who's driving the presentation? Is that you, Matt?
Yeah. Is it? I'm just clicking though, so.
Sorry, maybe it's lagging a bit. Apologize.
Let's see. Let me go back and try again here. Yeah, it looks like these are the same, different headings, but the same content. Yeah, I apologize here.
That's okay. No problem. We can move on. So we'll shift gears now and talk about how we use the data that we acquired in the field to update the model. And so on this slide here, you can see the map on this slide on the left side of the slide shows the zone. So basically, you can see there are 4 PRW wells on the property. Each one of those wells had different conditions in those wells. So we elected to zone out the site in the model into 4 zones in map view, like you see there, to reflect the different conditions in those areas of the site based on the data we acquired from the wells. So that's advancing the model, making it a bit more site-specific and a bit better, and we're improving confidence in the model. The complex graphic on the right-hand side of the slide shows that we also did a similar process with depth. We broke the subsurface down to about 1,200 feet into zones, 3 zones, aquifer zone A, B, and C, based on the data we collected in the wells, and we assigned parameters in those zones based on the data we collected. So basically, we took all that information from the model and we put it in to the computer code to basically make the model replicate what the site looks like more than we had in the initial model we built in 2020. We also spent a lot of time working out how the model simulates pumping levels. That's critically important for the project, for us to help Joe and his team design the pumping equipment and figure out how many wells. So we spent a lot of time making sure our model could pump in ways that we believe are going to occur when we pump the well field in the future. And then we also added a water quality model to the model to study water quality conditions that come out of the well field. So those were the basic updates we made to the model based on the field program. Next slide, please. So basically, as I indicated earlier, when you build a model like this, it's a simplified version of a complex system. The subsurface is very complex, and these models are always simplifications. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our model can reproduce conditions that we observed at the site. So back in 2017, Avek recharged about 6,000 acre-feet of water, and we monitored what happened in the groundwater system during that period of recharge and after that period, in fact. And the dots on this map show the groundwater level rise we saw in 3 of the wells that were on the site during and after the recharge. You can see in the orange dots was for MW2. We saw almost 18 feet of rise in the well during and after recharge. And so in the other wells, you can see 10 and 14 feet of rise. So we ran our groundwater model, and we wanted to see how well our model could replicate those rises that we observed. And you can see the solid lines are our model projected rise. And you can see we did a pretty good job of matching the rise, depth below ground surface in feet. And you can see that the aquifer zones A, B, and C, that's how we parsed out the depth. You can see the red bar in the upper square there. In there, you see about 30%, a little over 30% of the flow that was coming into that well as we were pumping it came from the zone 300 to 550 feet or so. Our model indicated, our model simulated, just over that, so pretty close to that 30%. So we feel good about that. That same pattern plays out on the rest of the graphic. So overall, if you just look at it, and you can see that our red and green lines match pretty well, meaning that our model is doing a good job of replicating how flow enters those 4 pilot recovery wells. That's going to be critically important for the next slide. I'm going to show about water quality. This was an important step to make sure our model simulated pumping wells at the site accurately for use in projecting the well field performance. Next slide, please. And so this slide shows a slide of concentration, arsenic concentrations. So the left-hand graph, the side of the graph shows the concentration in micrograms per liter, range from 0 to 22. And all the 4 PRW wells are shown here. And the black bars show what we measured from a sample taken at the wellhead, and the gray is what we simulated in our model. And you can see that in general, the gray and black bars are very similar, meaning that the model does a good job of reproducing the arsenic concentrations that we detected when we sampled the well under pumping conditions. That's going to be critically important as we now scale up the model, to simulate, future operation of 27 wells. And we're going to apply these types of data to that simulation, as we'll show in a few slides here, to see what might happen when you combine all the water in the well field to the output, to talk about things like maybe whether they treat the water or not. So critical steps. So these last 3 slides were really critical for us to demonstrate to us and our team here that our model was calibrated, if you will, to site conditions. And that tells us that we have better confidence in this model for predictive purposes. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move towards talking about how do we use this calibrated model now that we have this tool that we have more confidence in than we did in our initial model to look at future operation of the project. So we estimated the recharge capacity again and the recovery capacity again with our better model. We also estimated groundwater quality from the well field, and we also looked at the potential effects that pumping and recharge and pumping at the high desert water bank might have on nearby wells. So we're going to work through each of these real quick and show what the model predicted for these aspects of the future operation. Next slide, please. So recharge capacity. So on the left hand, on the map here, you see a bunch of shaded areas, and we're going to focus on the yellow and blue tonight. So the blue areas are the engineered gravity-fed basins. So all the basins that are shown conceptually on the map there in blue and yellow are fed by gravity, meaning we don't need any pumping equipment to feed the basins. And the blue areas are engineered, meaning they're permanent basins with engineered structures to keep the basins, as they're built. The yellow areas are areas where we can push up berms and recharge water in those areas as well. But if there was a flood flow that went through those areas, some of those berms might get destroyed, and we have to rebuild those berms. So those areas we call push-up berm areas. And so that's how the site is conceptualized now from the standpoint of where we're going to recharge water. And the assumptions we made for this simulation in the model are that we're going to do continuous recharge for 1 year. It's the baseline assumption that we're going to flood the basins and keep them full for a year. We're also going to allow, when we begin to recharge water at this site, water is going to move through the unsaturated part of the subsurface, and then there's going to be a big mound that's going to develop underneath the property. And that mound is going to continue to build up, and eventually it's going to reach the bottom of the basins, we believe. That's what our model suggests. That's pretty typical of continuous recharge projects. And by allowing that mound to come all the way up to the basin bottoms, we can get more water in the ground. So we assumed that the mounding would come up to the bottom of the basins late in the recharge period, again, to get more water in the ground. So the results we saw from the model are favorable, as we summarize in the table here. So we ran 3 different scenarios, basically 3 different areas of acreage of recharge basins. And you can see if we just use the dark blue basins, gravity stage 1 and gravity stage 2 north and south, 417 acres of basins, we would get about 63,000 acre feet of recharge in 1 year. About 14 months to store the 70,000 acre foot goal. And if you continue to recharge for a long period of time, it takes 6.5 years for us to store the 280,000 acre feet of water, which is the limit specified in the agreement.
We're losing you. We can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
You got real faint.
Can you hear me better now?
A little louder, please.
All right.
Good.
Okay, good. Thank you for letting me know that. So I don't know if you heard, but I'm looking at the table now on the bottom. I was looking at scenario 1, and based on scenario 1, using 417 acres of basins, we can get about 63,000 acre feet of water in the ground, about 14 months to store that water, and 6.5 years to store 280, the limit in the specified in the agreement. If we add an additional basin acreage in the yellow there, I believe we're adding the yellow south push-up berms there. We expand the basin acreage to 562 acres. You can see we get more water in the ground, 77,000 acre feet of water, less than a year now to store that water, and it takes over 5 years to still store the 280. If we continue to add acreage to the basins, we get more water in the ground. If you look at the table and you use some math, you can figure out that it'll take about 500 acres of recharge basins filled with water to recharge 70,000 acre feet of water in 1 year. So again, a favorable outcome with the design we currently have, only gravity-fed basins, which is a good thing. We can store we believe we can get to the 70,000 acre feet recharge goal. So a good outcome on the recharge side of the project. Next slide, please. So groundwater recovery. So let's look at the map on the left side. The colored zones on the map on the left side are the same zones I noted earlier. So each one of those zones has a PRW well in it. You can see those in blue. And you can see the other gray dots on the map are the planned recovery wells in the current design. There are 27 wells that are planned to meet the recovery goal. And so we assume those 27 wells in our model simulation. We also assume those wells would pump continuously, but we also embedded in a 10% downtime assumption into it to take into account times when the wells will be down due to rehabilitation or other issues that occur with wells. When you operate lots of wells in small areas of this, you're going to have some downtime. So we wanted to make sure we account for some downtime. And we also started recovery assuming that there was no groundwater mound at the site. That's a conservative assumption, meaning we're going to get less water out in that year of pumping or in the pumping period because we don't have that mound there to help us get water out of the ground. We'll get more water out if there was a mound underneath the property. And the table, I'm not going to dwell on too much. We are with the wells. I will say that the last line in the table, which I didn't have the other table in the presentation, you can see on the last row of the table that the estimated capacity of our wells built so far ranges from 1,400 gallons a minute at PRW3 to 2,400 gallons a minute at PRW1. So you can see that the estimated capacity of those wells, if you just pump them by themselves, differs across the site. That's partly why we broke the site up into different zones, because the wells do perform differently. As I indicated earlier, the R3 well, which is in the right-hand corner there, in the salmon color, that well pumps over 2,000 gallons a minute based on our early testing. So this is the assumptions we used for simulating groundwater recovery in the model. Next slide, please. So I'm going to look at these graphs here. We lost our dot. Go back up. All right, well, let's see here. So, all right, so I'm going to look at the left-hand graph first, and I'm going so this is the what happens if you pump the well field for a long time. What would the rate of the well field do? So this is all the wells pumping, all 27 wells pumping. The left-hand axis of the graph is in total recovery rate in acre feet per year. So you can see that the black line on the graph starts at just under 70,000 acre feet per year. And let's say after 1 year, that rate drops to 67,000 acre feet per year. So you can see over time, the well field rate will begin to drop. And if you continue to pump that well field for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that rate, the pumping output of the well field as a whole is going to drop. And that's going to drop because we're interfering, all the wells are interfering with each other. We're drawing the water table way down at the site. And as you draw the water table down, the output of each of the wells begins to drop. And so therefore the total well field output drops. Likely operational scenarios, I wouldn't pump more than 1 year at a time, but over time the well field rate would drop. The right-hand graph shows cumulative volume recovered over time in the well field. So you can see it starts at 0, and if you look at where the blue line crosses, the lines that go across, you can see that after 1 year, if you go up, there was a dot there, you go over to the left side there, you see we recover about 70,000 acre feet of water in 1 year. And that's the goal. So that indicates to us that if you pump the well field for 1 year, you're going to get about 70,000 acre feet of water out of the ground. That's the goal. So we're going to need 27 wells, it appears, to get to that goal of 70,000 acre feet per year. You continue to pump the well field, you're going to get more water out of the ground, but the rate at which you're taking water out is getting smaller. And so you don't get the same amount out the next year. So if you pump for 2 years, you don't get 150,000 out, you get 130,000 out. If you pump long enough, you would get to the 80,000 total storage, but you can only recover 90% of what you put in. That's part of the agreement. That's 252,000 acre feet. To recover all the water you stored, potentially, it would take over 4 years. The pumping for that long of a time is not likely on the project, just given the availability of water. So that's a summary. So overall, again, favorable outcome here that the well field we have currently designed looks like it can meet that 70,000 acre foot per year goal, which is a critical goal by Metropolitan. Next slide, please. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about what might happen to nearby wells when we pump our well field. And so the map on the left side here shows 5 wells shown in red. The 2 wells on the western part of the map there are the Tejon Ranch irrigation wells that you can see the TRW 203 wells on the High Desert Water Bank property. And the 106 well is just off the south side of the property. Those are, again, Tejon Ranch deep irrigation wells. Those wells pump a lot of water. They only use TRW 203 these days, we believe. And we've got some information on that well. The 3 wells on the east are domestic wells that lie off the property. These are used for domestic purposes. And so we're going to use the model to predict, what might happen in those wells when we pump this well field. In fact, we're going to look at what happens when we recharge water and pump the well field. And we're only going to look at the effects that the high desert water bank has on water levels in those wells. So the graphs you're going to see in a moment, I'll explain. But we're only looking at what happens when we operate the high desert water bank. We're not accounting for what happens when they pump their wells. We know they're going to draw their water level down by just pumping their well. So let's move to the next slide, please. So we're going to focus on the two Tejon Ranch wells first. And so this graph, these graphs show a lot of things. So on the top of the graph, it shows recharge. It shows the cycle or the periods that have been assumed for this analysis. And I guess I should have said that in the previous slide. But so what we did on these simulations is we had a meeting with Metropolitan a while back, and we talked through a reasonable operational scenario for the project based on lots of factors, partly availability of water. We talked through it, and what we worked with here was a simulation that assumes 35,000 acre-feet of water recharged in each year for 2 years. So a total of 70,000 acre-feet of water put in the ground, 35,000 each year. That's shown on top. So the first 2 years, we're recharging water, and then there's a 1 year lag period. We're not doing anything. We're not recharging. We're not recovering. We're just letting the system rest. And then assumingly in the 4th year, it's dry and we need to pump the water out. So we start the well field and we're going to pump all the water out in 1 year. So 70,000 acre-feet of water restored. Conceptually, we're going to take out 70. We're not going to talk through the 10% leave behind now in these simulations. So basically, we've got a situation where we recharge, let it rest, and then we recover. And now in the graphs, we show on the left-hand axis of the graph is depth below the ground surface, and then the black dashed lines on the sides of the gray shading on the graphs show where the well is screened. So in the case of TRW 106, the well is screened from 400 to 1,100 feet approximately below the ground. It's a continuous long screen. And so that's a deep well with a lot of screen. And the blue line on the graph shows what our model projects will happen to the water level in that well when we recharge and recover. So after 2 years of recharge, you can see that we predict about a 60-foot rise of water level in that well. And if you wait a year, it falls about 5 feet. And then if you begin to pump the entire well field, compared to the starting value on the left side of about 260 feet below ground surface, we're going to draw the water level down in the well 100 more feet, so down to about 360 feet. And this drawdown or this drop in water level we're incurring or causing this well is in addition to what might be caused by the operation of that well if the Tejon Ranch operated the well. So if they operated this well and it had 100 feet of drawdown, they're going to get another 100 feet of drawdown due to our operation. We'll talk about in a minute what that means. So TRW 203, we know is their active irrigation well in this area. We monitored during the field program. Same assumptions on the simulation, same graph setup. You can see this well now has 3 different screen zones, one from about 430 to 560, another small screen from 750 to 800, and then a deeper screen from 850 to about 1,000 feet. So it's screened a little bit more, a little differently. And it's about 1,000-foot deep well. And you can see what happens here. Similarly, we got about 35 feet of water level rise in that well after 2 years of recharge. Water level stays about the same in the year of rest. And then when we begin to pump our well field, about 170 feet of drawdown will be caused in that well due to operation of our well field. Again, if they pump their well, they're going to create more drawdown. So again, that's going to create a lower water level in their well if they operate at the same time we're operating our recovery well field. So our recovery well field is going to affect at some level the operation of those 2 Tejon Ranch wells. That was expected. They're right on the property and right off the property. So not an unexpected outcome. This gives us an idea of what their outcome might look like. And one other thing I might add here, and I'll note again in the other graphs, is we don't know exactly where the pumps are set in these 2 wells. We know that the pump is deeper than 500 feet in the 203 well because we monitored that well during the field program, but we don't know exactly where their pump is set. So that is important, because if you draw the water level down enough, one thing you might have to do is lower your pump to maintain your pumping capacity in your well. So next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about 2 of the 3 domestic wells that are near the property. We'll start with the 3099 well, same graph set up. So you can see the 3099 well is a 600-foot deep well that has screen from about 225 to 600 feet. So it's got a fairly long screen. It's a fairly deep domestic well. I believe it was actually drilled down to 800 feet, but they didn't screen it below 600. And you can see that well's right across the street, effectively from the high desert water bank. So you can see when we operate the recharge operation here, we're going to get almost 100 feet of water level rise in that well. After a year of rest, the water level drops about 15 feet as the mound begins to relax after we've stopped recharge. So they're going to get a period of time when they're operating their well where the water level is going to be up to 100 feet higher than it is normally. And then when we begin to pump the well field, you can see that we're going to draw the water level down in the area, and we're going to incur about 35 feet of additional drawdown in their well compared to what otherwise would occur if we weren't there. And you can see they start at about 260 as well here based on our estimate. So we're going to draw the well down to almost 300 feet just based on our operation. And again, we don't know where the pumps are set in these domestic wells. We will get that information hopefully from the well owner soon. 1599 well, a little further from the site. You can see in the upper map, it's off to the east there a bit. And so it's a little further away. Same graph set up. Well is screened from 275 to roughly 400 feet. So it's not as deep. It doesn't have as long a screen, but it's further from the high desert water bank. You can see we're going to have about 50 to 55 feet of water level rise during recharge, but only about 5 feet of additional drawdown when we operate our well field. So with nominal effect in that well. See, the effect of the high desert water bank pumping operations damps out pretty quick with depth, with distance from the site. So pretty almost imperceptible change will be predicted to occur in that well. The last well on the next slide shows similar conditions at the 2251 well. East of the project, same slide setup. Well's about 400 feet deep with 100 feet of screen, about 50 to 60 feet of rise during recharge, but only about 10 feet of drawdown from where they would otherwise be when we operate our well field. So overall, we knew going in we were going to have some effect on the nearby wells. These are the wells that we studied. The high desert wells, those have some impacts in them. The domestic wells to the east, the closer you are, the more impact you're going to have. But overall, the impacts to these wells appear to be manageable. More information is needed to figure out what impact we might have on our operation. Next slide, please. All right, we're getting towards the end here. So the last thing we did with the model is we looked at what happens when we pump the entire well field. And as we know, the constituent of concern at the well field is arsenic. And so we studied arsenic. And so same scenario set up, 2 years of 35,000 acre feet of recharge, 1 year lag, 1 year recovery. In this case, now we're going to simulate arsenic concentrations in the recharge water. So now we're bringing water off the aqueduct, we're recharging it in the ponds of the site, and we assume that the arsenic concentrations in that water were 5 micrograms per liter. And if you recall earlier, I said that arsenic concentrations in the groundwater system, they're between 20 and 30 micrograms per liter, and if you pump the wells, you get between 10 and 20 micrograms per liter. So the water that's coming off the aqueduct is better quality with respect to arsenic than the groundwater quality. So we simulated the scenarios as we mapped it out there with arsenic coming in at 5 micrograms per liter, 70,000 acre feet of water comes in, and the graph here shows what that would look like, in terms of arsenic concentration out of the entire well field, all 27 wells blended together. What is the arsenic concentration? So the arsenic concentration starts at about 12 micrograms per liter and rises to about 14, then becomes stable after about 1 year. We believe that the most normal operation we're going to see out there is a 1 year pumping period. So basically, arsenic concentrations coming out of the entire well field above the 10 microgram per liter federal MCL for arsenic. So the water quality produced by the well field is is of lesser quality than the aqueduct water, which is about 5. It's actually a little bit less than that, in fact. And then it's also above the drinking water standard for arsenic. And so that indicates that we may have to treat that water before we can put it back in the aqueduct, because you have to meet certain standards before the water can go back into the aqueduct. Next slide, please. I think it's a summary slide. Good. So basically a summary of what we went through tonight. Recharge goal of 70,000 acre feet per year. It appears to be achievable based on the design we have, that we're going to start building those basins here pretty quick. A recovery goal of 70,000 acre feet per year also looks achievable with the 27 well field that we've designed. The wells be nominally 1,000 feet deep or so, high capacity wells, and we can achieve that 70,000 acre feet goal. Again, a critical goal for Metropolitan, because getting the water out of the ground quickly in dry conditions is a critical feature of this project they want to achieve. Based on the predictions of the model now, the High Desert Water Bank operation looks like it'll have generally minimal effects on the nearby wells, although more needs to be learned about the operation of those wells to put into context what we're seeing from the model, and we'll have those conversations with those well owners soon. And then, as I indicated, arsenic concentrations exceed the federal MCL for arsenic, but also exceed the Department of Water Resources non-project pump-in requirements. And so, by virtue of that, it looks like treatment will be needed before we can put the water back in the aqueduct for downstream use. So that is a summary of the groundwater modeling work that we've done to help Joe and his team to design the High Desert Water Bank, both recharge and recovery. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any tonight.
I have, this is Director Elaine, I have some comments. And again, I'm not on that committee, so my comments are just questions that I have. But I'm concerned what this is costing, the cost-benefit ratio. And I'm sure all of this information is good, but I hear we need more information and more information. And this valley wasn't built, based upon, have to do studies like this. I think people like John Yucasted, Gary Van Dam, we had pumpers, Combs, and different people with experience, been in the valley for a number of years, could probably answer these. And it's to do a study to say when you start a well, it's not going to affect the other one, and the amount of time it was talked about. I mean, that's rudimentary. And again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but you have people that do this that were enthused about it, and all this information is useful. But if you had a finance person, you may look at it: is the cost associated with this? Is it worth the information? At least all of the information. And I'll ask one question to staff: what is this costing us? Or what is it costing?
The cost of the
This is Matt. So the cost of the hydraulic model or the groundwater model.
The information's being presented. I know we're not paying it. Are we paying it directly, or it's going through?
It's Tim Leo is a sub-consultant to Stantec, Joe Long's firm, and this is all part of the envisioned High Desert Water Bank program with Metropolitan. So this scope of work and the work that Tim Leo is doing was all.
No, I'm asking Matt what it's cost. It's costing somebody X number of dollars.
It's costing Metropolitan Water District, and I don't know what the value of the model is. Is that what you're asking? Like dollar value?
What's the cost?
Yeah.
Whether who has to pay it, I don't care. I just want to know what the cost is.
Directly, it's contained within the contract with Central.
No, I understand that.
And I guess what I'm saying is we'd have to go back and look at it. I know what you want to know is specifically what does this scope of work cost, and we'd have to look into the contract to determine what that is. I don't have that precisely at hand, but I made a note here.
I know you'll get it, but through the time I've been back on the board, I think I've asked 3 different consultants to get back with information, and they all say, they never have right there. There's been 3 of them, but that's not staff, but that's consultants right there. But anyway, that's my comment. It's good information, very, very technical, but is it worth the total cost?
I can put
I'm not saying it is or is not, but I'm questioning it.
Maybe I can put some context on it. I mean, I don't have the exact number either, but I could probably guess close to what it is. But just to put it into context, the cost of the modeling work that we just reported on tonight would be, on the order of, it's, 1/20th, let's say, of one of the recovery wells. So, you can kind of tease out what that might be. But, I think that...
No, I can't. I'm just wondering what the...
Okay. So I think it might... The estimate I have of what the cost of this modeling work was on the order of, $80,000 to $90,000 of work to do this modeling. And so for that effort, my belief is that's a lot of value for what that cost was. We need this tool in order for us to help Joe's team, design the well field. There's always uncertainty in doing this in being able to predict what happens. So this is a very instrumental tool in the overall design of the project.
And you're very correct. I'm not making a judgment, but I did say earlier, people that do that specific work, they're going to think it's the best thing. If you had a financial analyst here, look at the cost-benefit ratio, that may not be their conclusion. And like I say, I'm not drawing a conclusion, but I am asking questions. I do have doubt.
Okay.
No, that's it. Thank you.
That conclude.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Good report. And sorry for the curveballs we threw you with the presentation.
Oh, no worries. That's no problem. If any other questions come up, I'm always happy to answer them, and I will do my best to get back and answer any questions that come up. So if there are other questions that don't get discussed tonight, I'm happy to get answers back to the board.
All right. That's all we have this evening on item 8E1. So, President Dias, I believe we're ready to move on.
Thank you very much. All right, that brings us to item 8C, Capital Improvement Committee. Again, Director Donato, do you have a report?
Yes, I do. So basically, so on this one, Matt, are we going to have Justin give the presentation on the Edison easement?
So, no, we're going to hold that one to hopefully the next meeting. So tonight we're going to talk about 8C1, which is consideration and possible action on acceptance of the work and filing the notice of completion.
Okay.
Rosamond Water Treatment Plant and Snip blending vault contract with W.M Lyles. So yeah, Justin Livesay, our engineering manager, has a brief presentation on this item. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, President Dias, members of the board. Moving right along. So just a little bit of background. The board may recall a contract was issued to W.M Lyles to install a blending vault at the Rosamond Water Treatment Plant. That contract was awarded in late 2021. And the concept of the project is to install this vault so that we can bring recovered banked State Water Project water from the West Side Water Bank into the Rosamond Clearwell Reservoir through a metered and flow controlled vault for effective THM control as we've done at our East Side Water Treatment Plant. I'll comment the project was partially funded through a Prop 1 Fremont Region Integrated Regional Water Management Program grant in the amount of $350,000 with no cost match required. All work on this project has been completed and tested. General Manager Chisholm wanted to highlight that we had no change orders required on this particular project. W.M Lyles did a great job, and the design team as well. No changes were needed. And one other thing to highlight on this project, we did bring a proposal for construction management services from Kennedy Jenks to the Capital Improvement Program Committee. And the committee and general manager made a recommendation that for this particular project, the complexity of the project would allow for our Avek staff to perform the construction management in-house. And so we were able to save approximately $80,000 by doing that work with existing Avek staff. And that worked out very well. And staff has inspected the final condition of the work and is very pleased with the final result. Everything came out exactly as planned. We've got a few photos to share with the board. This is the front of the Rosamond Water Treatment Plant. You can see because the project was grant funded, we needed to put a sign up there acknowledging that. So a very nice looking sign there at the front of the treatment plant. And here's the finished product. You can see a very clean site here. This vault is about 12 feet long by 10 feet wide. It's also 12 feet deep. Two 12-inch lines running through the inside of that vault there. And here's a view of what the inside of that vault looks like. Very clean work here by W.M Lyles. Everything looks good. And they're completely finished. There's nothing left to do. The agency, as is typical, we've withheld 5% of all progress payments on this project to date. So we've got about $28,500 in retention. And so the process to close this project out would be to file a notice of completion with the county that allows a waiting period where any subcontractors with any claims to file against the contractors have an opportunity to do so. After the required 30-day waiting period, provided no claims are filed, we are able to release that retention back to the contractor and officially close out the project. So no claims are anticipated on this fairly small project. And so we would ask that the board support staff and the committee's recommendation to authorize staff to file the notice of completion and release the retention after the required waiting period for this project. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
This is Director Sorsable. That was a great presentation, Justin, and I'm glad to hear that our staff was able to take care of the construction management. That's a big leap from the last few years that we're able to do that. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do you want a motion?
Yes, please.
Director Donato, 8C2, I make a motion that we approve the notice of completion on the work and that we go ahead and file it.
This is Director Miller. I'll second.
Are there any more questions or discussion? If not, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yeah, that was 8C1. Gary Van Dam?
Yes.
Audrey Miller?
Yes.
Robert Paris?
Yes.
George Lane?
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable?
Yes.
Frank Donato?
Yes.
Keith Dias?
Yes, the measure passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 9, General Manager's Report. Dwayne?
Thank you. Let's see, make sure. So this is the General Manager's Report for, doesn't have a date here, but it's today. The event, here's our Feather River Region weather forecast. We're anticipating no precipitation, and temperatures will be warm for the next 10 days. This graph here is one you've seen in the past. You can see these are several of the, here's some drier years. This is the current year. This corresponds to average. And then here's 18-19, which was a wet year. And then you had 16-17 was one of the wettest years that we have, along with 82-83. But you can see here we're right in this ballpark, and we anticipate that we'll end the year in this current 41.4 inches of moisture content, or precipitation, I should say. This graph here shows you a little indication of our reservoirs throughout the state. The green line is historical average for the date and time. And you can see the two major ones here. This is all also relative to volume. So you can see here's a couple of smaller reservoirs, and this is the largest one. This is Orville, and then this is Lake Shasta, and this is Trinity over here, part of the federal project. And you get an idea of where these, graphically, where these levels of the reservoirs are. If we look more closely into the Orville Reservoir, you can see here we've got about 1.4 million gallons of storage. This is blue line indicates the performance of precipitation that we did receive. It came through the Orville Dam situation. Here's your drawdown that you would anticipate. You can see that this is average, so we're well below average, but this was the worst year, and that was just in 2021 was our worst year, and then there was a little miscalculation with regards to how much water we were going to receive that particular year, so Orville really drafted low. But you can see we'll be starting out the new year in a better position than other dry years that we've seen, which is a little bit promising. And then once again, here we are. This is San Luis Reservoir. We have 622,000 acre feet total, about 30% of its total capacity and 73% of its historical average. Remember, this is a reservoir that's what they call an off-site reservoir, where water is just taken off the system and stored there for use later on in the year. This is where we accumulate the water during this period. You can see we had a poor situation there, but our actual demand is actually not as great as it would normally be in other years where we use more water. So the range of the dip here is well, which also lends itself pretty good for starting out the next year. As far as agency operations here, you got our groundwater capacity recovery is about 75% of our total capacity. We did do some operator interviews and established a priority list. This is the new security gate that you see here. This is right at the aqueduct entrance on the south end of the project. And then I believe Director Donato and Director Lane, who've been into the boardroom, noticed that we had a window that had gotten broken, and that window has been replaced. So let's look at operations here. You can see that we're running about 21 million gallons a day here. During this summer peak, we're getting about 16 million gallons a day out of our geopurification process. As far as we're getting there, so it's we're putting in close to 36 million gallons a day into the system. And as far as baking goes, we're putting in and taking out at the same level for water quality purposes. As we mentioned, the Rosamond intertie project was complete. Justin gave you a report on that. And then the West Side Water Bank underground piping and turnout project, we're going to flow test that next week. It's another project that's also going very well as far as its construction activities. As far as water quality goes, our monthly compliance sampling will be collected tomorrow. And our third quarter compliance with THMs will also be collected next week. As you can imagine, during this heat, there's a lot of things that go on with the aqueduct water as it comes off the aqueduct. And but we're able to treat all the high turbidity that we're receiving from the raw water without any major issues. That's the compressed air energy storage program they're going to have at RCSD. A discussion Thursday at 3 p.m. On that particular project. Also, the AV State Water Contractors Board meeting is August 18th at 6 p.m. And then we have our Water Master meeting on August 24th. My schedule, I'll be in the office the next 2 weeks. And I think that completes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Dwayne? If not, thank you very much, Dwayne. We'll move along to item 10. Are there any director's reports? If none, we'll move along to item 11. Is there an attorney's report tonight?
Nothing to report, President Dias.
Thank you, Tony. Item 12, request for any future agenda items. Hearing none. Item 13, old business, we have none. Item 14, closed session. Dwayne, do we have a reason to go into closed session tonight?
Yes, we do, for item A and C.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to go into closed session for items 14A and 14C?
Mr. President, this is Rob. I move we go into closed session for items 14A and 14C.
Thank you, Rob.
This is Director Sorsable. I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Gary Van Dam,
Yes.
Audrey Miller,
Yes.
Robert Paris,
Yes.
George Lane,
Yes.
Shelley Sorsable,
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes, the measure passes. And now Holly will move us into closed session.
Thank you. Please stand by.